Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast, looking ahead to this weekend's Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. From Racing News 365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined as always by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, and none other than lead editor Ian Parks, who is not with Otmar Zafnauer this weekend. Gentlemen, we're going back to Imola. Obviously, last year's race was sadly and horrifically cancelled, obviously due to horrible floods, and obviously there was a loss of life. Ian, how good is it to be going back to Imola this weekend, having actually not raced there now since 2022?
Yeah, it's going to be a very poignant race on a number of fronts this weekend, as I'm sure you guys can appreciate, as I'm sure all the viewers and listeners can appreciate as well. Poignant because obviously, as you mentioned, last year's race was cancelled due to the remarkable level of flooding that occurred last year, and as you've mentioned, there was a loss of life. All told, across that period of time, research indicates that there were 15 people that were killed eventually. Tremendously sad as to what occurred there. Numerous people displaced from their homes, of course, and it was inevitable that it had to be cancelled. Real shame. I mean, I remember seeing, I'm sure everybody does, seeing the video footage, the Formula One trucks underwater, the paddock buildings underwater, the local river there, the Santerno, which flows very, very close to the Imola circuit, bursting its banks. And there was just no way the event could go ahead. So on that respect, it looks like we've got good weather forecast for this weekend, so that's going to be something. And then, of course, the second poignant reminder with regard to Imola is, of course, 30 years on from Ayrton Senna, May the 1st, 1994. So we're just going to be past that date with regard to this particular Grand Prix, but of course, absolutely no doubt he's going to be fondly remembered over the course of the coming days, because as we mentioned in a recent podcast, Senna, just the legend that he was, deserves to be honoured, because he was a guy that really brought Formula One into the mainstream with the kind of guy he was, the kind of driver he was. Just as I say, an absolute legend. So for those two particular reasons, with regard to what happened last year, with regard to what happened at Ayrton 30 years ago, this is a race that's, I am looking forward to directly answer your question from the very beginning without getting too heavy-hearted. I am very much looking forward to it. It's a lovely track, lovely venue, great region to be visiting as well. It should be a good weekend this weekend, hopefully, and a normal weekend in many respects after the two sprint weekends that we've had in Miami and Shanghai.
Well, we'll get on to that interesting point in a little while. Sam, we now are entering the European leg of the season, and interestingly, a doubleheader, the second doubleheader of the season, with obviously Monaco following next weekend. How important for the teams is going to be getting momentum in Imola to take into Monaco?
I mean, it will be very important. I mean, first of all, I can't believe it's only the second doubleheader of the year. It feels like, we would have had more by this point, but it's very important. It's also worth mentioning that Imola and Monaco are very, very different prospects in terms of car setup, the track layout. Imola's incredibly high speed, and obviously Monaco is the almost complete antithesis of that. So yes, momentum will be important, but there is a big kind of step that the teams will have to make in the setups of the cars between those two events. So yeah, it will be an interesting challenge for the teams. Also, you mentioned the start of the traditional European season, which we often see as the kind of point at which you get the first real upgrades brought by most of the teams. Obviously, McLaren have preceded that slightly with the Miami Grand Prix, but we're expecting to see big moves from Red Bull to kind of counter that. Also Ferrari, you may have seen some photos online of the revised Ferrari. So yeah, we can start to see where the rest of the season will be going from here. So yeah, it's a big weekend for the teams.
I should
It's going to be an
quickly.
interesting one, to be honest. I was just sorry, Nick, I was just going to interject.
Go on,
That's the big point. Now, that's the big point that Sam's just made, because, as he said, McLaren jumped the gun in many respects by bringing their major upgrade package to Miami, because, again, as Sam mentioned, the start of the European season is always that key race where we know the teams are going to be thrown what they can, or have thrown what they can in this early part of the season at the car to update it. So we've already seen McLaren play its hand in Miami. Now, how Red Bull and Ferrari going to respond? We know both of those teams, especially Ferrari, coming with significant upgrade packages for this weekend. We saw McLaren get really close in terms of overall pace in Miami. Yes, of course, Lando Norris won that race. We've discussed that to the nth degree so far. You know, we know the safety car played a part. How close would he have got, etc. without that to Max? We're not quite sure. We can hypothesize, of course, but we know that in terms of overall pace, in terms of one lap pace, race pace, they are really, really close to Red Bull at the minute. So is this now going to be a case of Red Bull jumping that step further again? Can Ferrari keep pace with McLaren, with Red Bull? I think that's going to be the most fascinating thing to come out of this normal weekend, as we're now describing it. But of course, you know, that's the way it's going to be. So yeah, that's another key area as to why this one should be a really good Grand Prix to assess overall going into Monaco, then the week after.
For those who are listening to this podcast rather than watching it on YouTube, I probably should address my audio. So Sam described it before we recorded as myself being in a scene from Star Wars. I'm not. I'm at the Berlin E-Prix for Formula E. It's Monday recording this. There are 22 rookie drivers currently flying around the Tempelhof airport circuit. So if you hear any noises, it's Formula E, okay? It is not something scary happening. Moving on, obviously, then, let's talk about McLaren, because we saw in Miami, Lando Norris obviously won his first race. It was amazing scenes, and the celebrations went long into the night. His pace was extraordinary, but there was an element of luck with the safety car. We know this, we've discussed this. Given McLaren's upgrades and given Lando's pace whilst, you know, not only leading the race, but whilst in the pack, how important is it going to be for them to show this weekend in Imola that they can take the fight to Red Bull, and that their win in Miami wasn't just down to luck?
Go for it, Sam.
I think it's very important, because people will find the caveats to that win in Miami. Yeah, Max obviously running the turn 14, 15 chicane and damaging his floor, the safety car. But you can't escape the fact that there was a level of Oscar Piastri was able to keep him fairly honest in the early parts of the Grand Prix, which then did, you know, potentially put Verstappen under more pressure than he's used to, you know, knock-on effects, so on and so forth. So there was genuine pace there. Lando wouldn't have been able to pull the gap, regardless of any damage to Verstappen, if there wasn't. What I think is, again, as we've already kind of touched on, more critical now, though, is we will see a more balanced fight at the front this weekend. You know, McLaren played their hand early. What is key for McLaren is to show that actually they have made a step that is a bigger improvement than the likes of Ferrari. And also, can Red Bull make a equally sized step? If they can, I mean, it's going to be unfortunate for the viewers and the spectacle, but you have to assume there's a level of diminishing returns for Red Bull at this stage. So it would be fair to assume that Ferrari and McLaren have closed the gap slightly. But yeah, it's big for McLaren because, yeah, as we said, somewhat disguising their real pace in Miami was the fact that no one else had upgrades from that point. Around them to that level. So yeah, this will be the best indicator for how the rest of the season will unfurl, basically.
Anything to add to you?
Basically, Sam mentioned Oscar keeping the Red Bulls honest at the start, and this weekend we know that Oscar's going to have the full package on his car, because in Miami, Lando ran with 100% of the package. Oscar only had 50% of it. So the job that he did in Miami was, to all intents and purposes, a very commendable one. Obviously, unfortunate as to what happened with him in the incident with Carlos Sainz that, of course, necessitated the trip to the pits and dropped him to the back of the pack. Otherwise, he would have scored really good points in Miami, of course. So, we're going to see both McLarens now on an even keel, Lando and Oscar, in terms of their upgrade package. I didn't get the impression that was a one-off performance in Miami. Yeah, okay, certain things, again, might have played into their favour. Max hitting the bollard, as we know. The safety car, yes, of course. Did the temperatures, considerably high temperatures there, the highest that the teams have experienced all season so far, 28 degrees across the course of the weekend. Was that a key factor in helping them get the tyres into the right window? I get the impression, though, that package has really, as we saw in Austria in particular last year with McLaren and its upgrade package, and to a slightly lesser extent, but it made a good step again in Singapore when it further updated that package. I think they've made quite a leap forward. And I'm fully expecting them, regardless of what Red Bull or Ferrari produce over the course of this coming weekend, to be really in the thick of that fight. Those three teams really going head to head. I don't expect Red Bull to make a significant leap above McLaren with their upgrade package from everything that I'm hearing so far, from what I've been told. So it's going to be a step. Yes, of course, most upgrade packages do deliver a step. But as I say, I'm still expecting McLaren to be that bit closer compared to what we've seen building into Miami.
No, I completely agree. And I think the interesting point as well, Miami, was that even prior to leading, Lando's pace was quicker than Max, which is, I think, the extraordinary thing. And obviously Oscar as well, only having half the package in Miami. What is he going to be able to do when he has the full package? And we've seen in the past that McLaren have gone well at Imola. Although, speaking of Imola, there has also been some adjustments to the gravel traps. And, Sam, what do you think that's going to have an impact on this weekend?
I mean, I'm a purist, so first and foremost, I'm thrilled by the by the additional reintroduction, I should say, of gravel traps. I think it adds more jeopardy. You've got to be more precise, and this is a sport of precision. So I'm all for it. I think it's a good step, a good move. Essentially, it is just that. There is less room for error. I don't think it will change the driver's approach because you have to be absolutely on the limit to get the most out of the car anyway. I don't think anyone will be approaching things differently, much like Alex Albon kind of talked about during the kind of chassis saga at Williams. You almost can't think about it because as soon as you do, you're off your game. So I don't think it will actually change things in the input from the drivers. What it will do is change the consequences. So you might see a few kind of hairy moments from the guys, and I think that will be potentially separate the very, very good from the good.
It's interesting because we see nowadays more circuits removing the gravel traps, whereas obviously Imola has done the complete opposite. Ian, what do you make of that? Because it's almost, Imola's becoming even more old school.
Fair play to them. They need to be applauded. They need to be commended. Look, we hear the drivers on numerous occasions talk about the fact that they want to see the reintroduction of more gravel traps because no one likes to see these huge swathes of runoff areas that we've had at certain circuits. And we still, obviously we do have it at some of the circuits currently in Canada. I mean, the one that always springs to mind, of course, is Paul Ricard with those. I mean, yeah, okay, they did something a bit different where those stripes going across, they were supposed to slow the car down because they'd done something with those stripes. And whilst it looked magnificent from a photographic perspective, from an actual racing perspective, it just looked awful seeing that. So I think what Imola's done with its decision to bring gravel traps to the fore again, and as Sam's mentioned, to introduce that greater element of jeopardy for the drivers, because they know that, a few inches over, they're going to pay a certain price for that slight error. It is, Formula One is a game of precision. You have to get it right. The white lines are there for a reason. The regulations go on about those white lines that you have to stay within them. Well, if you go over them, therefore, the drivers get punished when there are gravel traps. And for me, as mentioned at the start, it's commendable what they've done. So let's see what the upshot is should any driver make a mistake over the course of the 3 days.
Something else which is actually quite extraordinary about this weekend in Imola is that we come here on the back of 2 sprint races. Imola last year would have had a slightly different qualifying format in that the plan was for the hard tyres to be used in Q1, the medium in Q2, and the soft in Q3. The year before that, in 2022, the first year of being in Imola with the current regulation of cars was the sprint format. So actually, this is the first time we're going to see the current era of cars having a traditional weekend at Imola. Sam, how do you think the drivers are going to approach that when they've actually got, for the first time in these cars, the full practice, amount? There's less data to look back on as well.
There is less data, but we will see a more conventional weekend in the kind of, I think, the status quo of things, because it's got the usual kind of run up and the kind of pace to the ebb and flow of the weekend. The drivers will be thrilled. Like, let's not get that confused. They will be very happy to return to a normal format. But I think it will be a more balanced weekend because of it. There will be a level of getting back into the swing of things. We don't always have back-to-back sprint races, and to come fresh from a new sprint format, essentially, with obviously the 2 parc fermé periods that I know we've discussed in the past, it will be a bit of a reintroduction, getting used to things that, once everything is done for qualifying, that is it. There is no kind of second bite at the bite at things. So I think it will be a calmer weekend in that sense, which is where stuff like the gravel traps and the changes to the circuit will add to the show.
The last couple of weeks, Ian, we've spoken about which teams will like it being a sprint weekend. So now the flip now, which teams will be disappointed that this is a traditional weekend?
Which teams will be disappointed?
Disappointed. There we go. That's a new question.
That's okay. That is a flip. I wasn't expecting that one, mate, to be honest with you. I need to, just while I'm talking, just think about that one for a second. Which teams will be disappointed?
Well, because, we've seen in the past that the sprint format has, in the low midfield, worked really well for the likes of Haas, State, RB have performed well. Is there any teams who you think actually will be relieved, that it's a normal weekend, and some who we're thinking actually we perform better when there's a sprint?
Well, I think all the leading teams are going to be more than happy that this is a normal weekend again, because especially those that will be happy will be Red Bull and Ferrari, because if they're coming with their significant upgrade packages, that means they've got 3 whole practice sessions to absolutely fine-tune them for both one lap and the Grand Prix itself. So Max Verstappen, we know, not a massive fan of sprint weekends. He's absolutely going to be delighted, and with 3 practice sessions, as I mentioned, to get his new setup right, or to get the upgrades right with the setup, he's going to be probably the happiest of all. As you mentioned there, Nick, the likes of Haas, that's managed to grab some points, out of these weekends, they're going to be, thinking, that it's one less chance to do something a little bit different. The mid to lower grid teams are going to be thinking, it's an opportunity gone for us. And now, but at least they've got the 3 practice sessions to then try and do something that little bit different to get Imola right. Because as you've said at the very start, this is the first race at this circuit with this current spec of car, bearing in mind they were introduced, these regulations were introduced in 2022, where it is a normal 3 practice session weekend. In 22, of course, 1 practice session straight into the sprint, and the format that brought about over the course of that weekend. So there is a degree of normality, and that probably everybody will be happy with to a certain extent, you would assume. But most definitely, as mentioned, the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari, the happiest And anybody that's bringing major upgrades, whichever of the other teams are going to be bringing major upgrade packages this weekend, they're going to be the most happiest because they've got these 3 hours with which to play with to get everything right.
I think one group that's going to be, I'm going to say, the happiest of all, and this cuts across all the teams, the mechanics. I think they're going to be absolutely thrilled that it's a normal weekend. So yeah, shout out to all of those who have, I think, really put up against it by the sprint weekend format.
It's a bit of a curveball question. Sorry, I've not done that one before. We've got to talk about Ferrari. It is their home race, and with the new the traditional format, it's a big chance for them. Sam, how likely do you think it is that we're going to potentially see Sainz or Leclerc on the top step of the podium this weekend?
Do I have to answer in a percentage term of the probabilities of this? I think that they will be able to keep Red Bull honest, much like McLaren could in Miami. I think from what we've seen from the Ferrari, it looks like they are, as you expect with regulations at this kind of point, they are converging towards that approach that we've seen Red Bull use. So you would assume that they are going to be, able to kind of take the fight to them better than they have done. And I mean, Carlos Sainz has been in very, very good form at the start of the year, maybe tailed off slightly. I think Verstappen, if he has a normal weekend, still wins. But I wouldn't be surprised if Sergio Perez isn't able to get on the podium. I was going to say close to the podium. I think he can be close to the podium, but I think a Ferrari or a McLaren will be in that fight for sure.
Ian, a slightly different take on the question for you, because this is obviously the first time F1 has been to Italy since Lewis Hamilton announced his move to Ferrari. Do you think he is going to receive the biggest reception of his life this weekend?
I wouldn't say of his life. No, that will probably come next year if he's on the podium at Monza or even Imola. But certainly you would assume he's going to be welcomed, most definitely. This is a guy that's won 7 world titles, 103 Grand Prix. He's one of the greatest of all time. We have to put that into context. He's won 7 world titles at the end of the day, alongside Michael Schumacher in terms of number of titles won. Max is heading in that direction, of course. 3 at the moment, likely 4 this year, could be 5 next year, given the regulations stay the same. But just getting on to Lewis and Ferrari, obviously that caught everybody by surprise earlier in the season, February 1st, when that was announced, not April the 1st, so no April Fool's Day joke there. Nobody saw it coming. It hadn't been reported anywhere. So a huge move for Lewis, a huge move for Ferrari. I interviewed Fred Vasseur not so long back in China, and I asked him about the move then, and he said it was a no-brainer to do what he did, regardless of the fact that Carlos was the only driver to beat a Red Bull last season in terms of to the top step of a podium, winning in Singapore, of course. He felt, with Charles, that guy's, Ferrari through and through, embedded in the team. And whilst, yes, it was the most difficult of decisions that he had to make in the end, for him, and I'll use the phrase again that used, it was a no-brainer, because here was a guy he has worked with before in the junior formula, has long maintained a good relationship with over the intervening years. And when he learned of the possibility that Lewis could be available, he made a play. Of course, that upset his good friend, Toto Wolff at Mercedes. But he had an opportunity. He saw it, he went for it, and he managed to get a guy now that is quite clearly not enjoying his time anymore at Mercedes. This is a year I don't think Lewis could ever have forecast in terms of where that car is at in terms of its relationship against its rivals. The team has struggled. They've introduced a new concept this year. It's not working. They're doing their utmost to try and get it to work, but Lewis is not producing the results that he would most sincerely have hoped for with his final year with Mercedes. And you can almost expect now that it's a case of within him that I can't wait for this season to end and I can't wait to join Ferrari. And the bottom line, to go back to the question that you asked, is I can imagine that the Ferrari fans cannot wait to see him in red next year either.
And of course, the driver who we've already spoken about is, I guess, the hot favourite to replace him, Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Mercedes' teenage sensation is probably the easiest way of putting it. The initial rumour, obviously, was that he could be introduced, at Williams instead of Logan Sargent at Imola. We quickly clarified that's impossible. He's 17. He's not 18 until the race day of Zandvoort, which is the legal age to race in Formula One. When he does turn 18, how likely and how quickly do you think he is going to be introduced to the F1 paddock?
Things can happen very quickly in Formula One, as we know. It's almost incredible. It's almost impossible to call, because what if Logan Sargent has a real uptick in performance over the summer? I'm not saying that he will or that I think he will, but I think given Mercedes' influence at Williams, and James Vowles has made it clear that he is his own team principal and that he wants to do things his own way. I think the move has. I think the decision on Sargent has been done essentially. Again, but the outstanding question is: will the FIA grant this super license exception that we believe has been submitted? Mercedes are claiming they didn't submit it, so surely then it's Williams. So you've got to assume that this move could actually happen before then, if that grant is given. And yeah, at the least, I think it'd be fair to assume that come Monza, which is the race after the Dutch Grand Prix, you're going to see Kimi Antonelli in the Williams. Like, otherwise, why submit the exception? So that's where everything's kind of flowing towards at this stage, I think.
I'm not still ruling out the possibility that he's going to be in a Formula One car before the Dutch Grand Prix weekend.
Exactly.
The bottom line is that for consent to be given, for the the exception to be given, there has to be unanimity between F1, the FIA, and the 10 teams. So you can assume that F1 and the FIA will likely come together on it. And it then becomes a case of, will any of the 10 teams object? Why would anybody outside of Williams and Mercedes want to object? Is another question to be asked. What have they got to gain by objecting to a team wanting to Williams? Let's call it like it is. Why would they object to Williams dropping Logan and bringing Kimi in the car? Go on, Sam.
The biggest reason is, if you're in a Constructors' Championship fight with Williams, why risk them bringing someone in who could be a step forward than Sargent? Say Albon is scoring points by then, obviously Williams. Yeah, it's like you wouldn't, would you? You go, well, no, we're pretty happy with the guy they've got in their number 2 car. Like, so yeah, I think from that perspective, it's going to be a lot of resistance. I think what's interesting though is there's a lot of debate kind of around whether or not it would be fair, given that in the past these exceptions have not been granted, notably to a Colton Herta. It is also worth pointing out that while 17, Kimi Antonelli does actually have the requisite number of super license points. So if as soon as he turns 18, he is eligible. That's where it's different. Obviously, Herta has come up through a non-FIA system in America, and that's where the distinction lies. But yeah, I think we're on the same page here that it could happen before the Dutch Grand Prix, but also surely it's not in many teams on the grid's interest for that to happen.
Yeah, you're right. And, whilst I'm saying here that it could happen, I would also be disappointed on one hand if it did, because that would mean the FIA has played a part in breaking its own rules. Bearing in mind, they set these regulations in place because the feeling was at the time that Max came in too young, too soon. Regardless of what he did at the time when he eventually came in, and obviously what he's done since has been quite astonishing and remarkable. But there was a feeling at the time it was too young, too soon. So they set this new rule in place, 18. So that would mean, as I say, the FIA playing a part in breaking its own rule. the flip side, I said on one hand I'd be disappointed. On the other hand, I wouldn't be disappointed to see Kimi come in, because I think it's a team or teams, bearing in mind he's a Mercedes junior, but Williams want him in their seat, that's willing to say, look, we're willing to take a chance on this kid. We think he's got what it takes. We're saying to you, we think he's got what it takes. Please let him in. So I think it would be a real shot for Formula One if he did come in before his 18th birthday.
But I think also this it's a very interesting conversation, because with Max, it wasn't so much, he was quick enough. Antonelli is quick enough by all accounts of, what we've heard about the testing times. It's one thing taking a lap when you're by yourself, but can he race? And this was what the issue was with Verstappen. The close wheel racing, the conduct on track, that's where I think in hindsight people are going, maybe that was too much too soon. And this is maybe where Antonelli's F2 season comes into the picture as well. What does he do on track? What's the conduct like? Is he fair? Because, as I said, Verstappen was too aggressive when he came in, or that's what the feeling was there were mistakes, there were errors in judgment, and that is something that he has had to really had to dial out, and he did do 6-7 years ago now. But that's, I think, where there's going to be some resistance from the teams.
And obviously, whilst he's had a stellar junior career, he's not really pulling up trees at the moment in F2. Yes, you could argue it's the car, of course. And Toto Wolff has turned around and said, look, forget all this noise around you. You need to focus on F2 first and foremost. And absolutely right. He's got to start performing in that car as well before. You got to feel sorry for him a little bit, because there has been so much. And here we are talking about him. He's a topic of conversation. That's where it's gone in Formula One in the minute, that this guy has become such a topic of conversation. He's 17, for heaven's sake. He's barely out of school. Doesn't even have a driving license in Italy, which would be another law regulation that they'd have to break.
If he lived in the UK, he'd still be in sixth form. Let that sit in.
Exactly. For those of us who live in the UK, of course. But you know what I'm saying, guys? He's 17 years old, and here we are. We're talking about him being thrust into the upper echelon of motorsport. And as I say, he's not quite doing the business in F2 at the moment for whatever reason, despite the fact, yes, he's had this stellar junior career leading up to F2. I'm sure that's obviously must be car related. It's maybe not got the best set of wheels underneath him, but.
He's got arguably Ollie Behrman's Saudi Arabian cameo was a great feather in Antonelli's cap, because he is keeping Ollie fairly honest in terms of pace performances in that Prema. So if Ollie can jump in and perform in the way he can, surely by extension, there's a chance that Antonelli could do the same. So there is some real nuance and moving parts to this. It's definitely a story that's going to kind of rumble on for the coming weeks and months.
You would assume so. I was just offering different threads to the argument, of course. So.
Yeah.
But that is really interesting. Obviously, for those who are watching on YouTube, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because this is a topic I think is going to rumble on probably until he's 18, let's be completely honest. The interesting thing is, though, is that obviously, Antonelli being as amazing as he's made out to be has obviously had a massive impact on the career of others. One in particular I spoke to this weekend in Berlin is Frederick Vesti, the Mercedes reserve driver, the 2023 Formula 2 vice champion, claims 6 wins in F2, which is, not an easy feat. He said he still, believes he has every chance of F1, that there's stuff happening, but also referred to Antonelli as, not directly, but almost as part of a bump in his career, because Kimi is just this sensation that Mercedes want as soon as possible. Do you think it's fair that drivers as talented, for example, as Vesti, who Mercedes obviously have faith in, they gave him the rookie sessions last season, do you think it's fair that drivers like Vesti are kind of being forgotten given everything that's going on, when he's a driver who could probably quite easily do a good job, for example, for Williams?
I'm going to pass to our F2 experts. Coop here.
There you go.
On the one hand, I think it's perfectly fair. This is a meritocracy. If you could be a veteran of 2 F2 seasons, in your 20s, If there's a guy who's done 3 rounds of F2 in 17 and is quick enough, talented enough, I hate the phrase better than when it comes to this sort of thing, but if he is deemed to be someone who can extract more performance from the car and is a surer bet long term, that's just the way it goes. Like, it's tough, but that is it. This is why we love motor racing and high level sport, is because it is ruthlessly competitive. On the other hand, a lot of the guys in F2 are maybe not getting a fair rub of the green in F1. Careers are running longer, as we see with the likes of Alonso and Hamilton, and that is just how things are. Vesti was brutally unlucky last year. He had some real misfortune. As you say, won six races. Teo Porchoa, who took the championship, won one. There's putting together a season is difficult, and there just wasn't space for Vesti. What could be interesting is, say Mercedes say, we don't think Antonelli is ready next year, 2025. So we're going to see how things are for 2026. And Carlos Sainz goes, no, I need longer reassurances from you. I'm going to go to Audi. Yes, Williams could be an option for Vesti, but could he say, look, give me a year, I'll take the Mercedes seat for a year? Why not? Because he could perform well, and somewhere else on the grid, elsewhere, could go, you know what, we'll take Vesti for 2026. So there's potentially opportunities at Mercedes as well as Williams.
It's interesting because we're seeing quite a lot of drivers who are very talented, perform very well in F2. For example, Felipe Dragovic, obviously Aston Martin reserve, and coincidentally has actually just caused a red flag because he stopped on track. He's here with Maserati. But we are seeing those several drivers of a high caliber effectively sitting and waiting at the back of the garage for an opportunity that never comes. Do you think there's necessarily a good enough system? I guess it's more a question to you, Sam, obviously with F2. Do you think the system, the junior ladder, is working as it should be? Because we are seeing less talent making its way to F1, primarily because, as you mentioned, drivers are retiring that much older now than they were, say, 10, 15 years ago.
I think, if I'm being honest, I think it says more about F1 than it does F2. And I say that with all awareness that Formula 1 obviously owns Formula 2. So I think there's a variety of factors at play. It's more and more difficult for the drivers making a step up. There's less time to practice, to acclimatise. Pre-season testing is that much shorter. Even guys like Fernando Alonso, who you can consider part of the problem, of saying we need more testing time. So someone like Logan Sargent stepping in, he struggled. Yes, you get generational talents like Oscar Piastri, or you get guys who go back to back through F3 and F2. George Russell, Charles Leclerc winning titles. You get those drivers, and they will still find their way through. So you could argue that actually you need to be that level. Guys should be that level if they want to get into F1. But it is the career longevity. I think that's certainly having an impact. We've only got 20 seats on the F1 grid. That's less than there was certainly less than there was a decade ago, or just over a decade ago. I can't believe it's already 2024. Obviously referring to when there was 12 teams for a couple of years in the kind of late 2010s. So that's making things more difficult. So the talent is more concentrated, the standards are higher, and that is ultimately why you're seeing fewer drivers breaking through. But it just means they need to do more. But everything in F2 is skewed towards preparing the guys and girls for that next step. There are more things they could do. There's power steering in Formula 2. That makes things difficult because you don't get power steering in Formula 1. Oh, so you do get power steering in Formula 1 and you don't in F2. But then that's where someone like Formula E is a good option for these guys, because as we know, Formula E steering, very, very difficult to get a handle of, as you well know, Nick. So I think that's why other drivers are starting to look at those different avenues.
Anything to add, Ian?
I think going there, I mean, Sam's described Oscar Piastri as a generational talent. I still think
to be proven.
I still think we're to be proven. I still think we're to the best of him. But even he, my point is, even he had to wait a year on the sidelines, having won his titles all the way through his junior formula. Even he then had to wait one more year before making that step up to Formula One. It is becoming more and more difficult for these junior guys because we are seeing such longevity with Formula One drivers now. Fernando, obviously, Lewis, obviously, even Nico Hulkenberg now coming back into Formula
Very
One.
good point.
Yeah.
And now managing to get a prized seat going forward with Audi from 2026. These guys, I mean, Nick's mid-30s now. He's going to be pushing his 40s by the time he comes out of that contract with Audi. So it just goes to show just how difficult it is these days for any young driver aspiring to get into Formula One because of the longevity of the current crop.
No, it's a really, really good point. And I guess any time will tell how many F2 drivers make it to F1, or who knows, maybe more will come to Formula E, because there is actually a considerable amount of F2, F3 and FRECA talent here who I've spoken to, so that's been good fun. Let's get on to our bold predictions. It's that time of the podcast, and you know what? I'm going to give you two time to think, because obviously my bold prediction of a Lando Norris win was correct for Miami. So I think as the current prediction champion, I'm going to go first. I think Lando's going to win again.
Oh, okay.
There we go. And that was your reaction as well when I said it the first time. So you know what? Watch this space. Sam.
I mean, do I hold steady? Do I stick with my double Red Bull DNF?
No.
No, I'm not going to.
If you say every podcast, then it's eventually going to come true. Is that it? Brilliant.
Yeah, eventually, and they'll be like, "Told you, I know what I'm talking about." And everyone go, "Well, yeah, you've made one shot out of 20. Like, it's not great shooting percentage."
Just don't read the comment section then. So.
Yeah, you never can. It's not. It's not good for your self-esteem if you do. But bold prediction.
Will you steal mine?
Here we go.
I was going to go Alpine double points finish.
And you thought mine was silly. That's
P9, P10.
Okay.
But
okay, interesting. Ian?
It's bold. It's meant to be.
It is
exactly.
bold.
So therefore he didn't pinch mine, and I'm going Carlos Sainz victory.
Oh.
On a weekend when Ferrari sweep back into Italy, as we talked about, Lewis Hamilton's going to be given rousing cheers. Carlos is going to go hell for leather and say, "Do you know what, guys? This is why you should have kept me, not signed Lewis."
I like that. That's a good prediction.
Me, at what point do Ferrari fans start going, I think we've kept the wrong guy? Well, I think the team have kept the wrong guy. Does it get to that point? Obviously, as you say, Charles is so heavily embedded in the team and has been for years. Yeah. But does it ever get to that kind of that tipping point?
You've got to start wondering at what stage. If Carlos does manage to pull off a victory, let's say this weekend, then without a shadow of a doubt, it's going to be questioned straight away after that. We are going to be questioning it on this podcast next Monday, I've no doubt, if that's the case, if Carlos does go and win. Because, I gave you some comments from my interview with Fred and as to why he chose Lewis over Carlos. And he knew he said it was a difficult conversation that he had to have with Carlos. He ultimately believed that the right decision has been made, and for the long-term future of this team, that Charles remains the better bet than Carlos. Of course, he's going to stick by his guns. We can, if Carlos does win again, we can ask him the same question on Sunday evening in Imola. Have you made the right decision? And we'll get our answer from him. Of course, he's going to say, yes, he made the right decision. He's not going to turn around and say no. Why would he? But of course, I think then it's really going to start becoming a serious subject of debate in garages, barbershops, shops in general, up and down Italy. And I'm referring to those because I'm going back to Netflix Drive to Survive episode this season, and where the fans were talking about Fred Vasseur having been hired as the Ferrari team principal, and it showed scenes in a barber's, in a coffee shop, in a garage, in a normal shop, and where these fans were talking, saying that Fred wasn't the right person. He's not Italian. Why on earth are we bringing in someone that doesn't understand Italian? So here we are. We could be having the same conversations again up and down Italy if Carlos goes and wins, and the fans are going to be saying, "Why him? Why have we let him go? Why have we retained Charles? Because he's the guy that's won us not only the last 2 Grand Prix, it could be 3 Grand Prix if he goes and wins in Imola."
Well, let's see if we're talking about that this time next Monday. If you have any questions for any of us, let us know in the comment section below, and also give us your thoughts on the topics we've discussed and give us your bold predictions. Come on, it shouldn't just be us three. From myself, Ian and Sam, this has been the latest episode of the RacingNews365.com podcast. We will see you same time next Monday, or in my and Ian's case, we will see you this weekend for the F1 updates. See you later.
Take care, folks.
Bye.